Good morning. The Power and the Glory, Part 2, Chapters 2 and 3. The young men and the young women are walking around the square in a circle. The women are going one way, the men are going another. This is the poor replacement they have for a religious ceremony that they may have retained in the time when there were books. Apparently books have been banned, and of course there's a policeman or a soldier watching them with a gun on his hip. There's nothing to do but this, and this is the capital city of one of the states in the country. And our priest has now changed his clothing. He's wearing what's called a drill suit. It's shabby. And there's a beggar there. The priest is watching the crowd, and there's a beggar there. We all know what Jesus says about beggars. He's very confidential. He wants to talk to the priest. And it makes a man, looking at that, the beggar says, would make a man want a few pesos. I feel as if I could kill somebody. So he starts to beg from the priest. And the priest has some money, but he's trying to hold on to it to buy alcohol, 2 types. And so the beggar begins to run the guilt trip on him, because the priest says, I want to spend this money on drink and wine. Things in this city-state are as depressed as everywhere else. The taxis are down the hill waiting for people to ride them. Nobody's riding them. They're not going to get any fares. And the beggar says, I could get you an introduction to a bootlegger. A bootlegger is somebody who sells alcohol illegally. Meanwhile, sitting there on the sidewalk, the police march by, and the mestizo is among them. He's being taken away. He looks at the priest. He knows who he is. The priest is here, he says, for wine, apparently for the liturgy, if he does one. And so the beggar says, you're going to need somebody to give you an introduction to this bootlegger. And so he takes them, or he takes the priest upstairs to a hotel, and he introduces him. The Beatles are thudding against the screens and popping under the feet, more death, a little more blood, and points out to the priest that the man you're going to meet is the cousin of the governor. And you have to be introduced by someone he trusts, otherwise you don't buy from these guys. Let's go back to the beginning of the book. Alcohol's outlawed, but they're still offloading beer from the last ship that came in. What's that going on there? So he's about to meet this bootlegger who gets the alcohol from customs, and they look at him and notice he's a stranger. And also the beggar says, if you're going to buy alcohol from this guy, you got to offer him something to drink as well. The priest wants to keep some to take home. He doesn't have a home. The beggar asks him, what's your trade? And the priest says, I pick up what I can where I can. So he's not really lying, but he's not telling the truth. So they meet this man and says, he's a man with a pasty face, and he's dressed in a suit that's too tight, and a revolver is under his shoulder or his waistcoat. He says, you want some brandy? Well, he says, I get my drinks legally, and I have to charge what they cost me. So he reaches into a mattress, that's where he keeps his stash, and he pulls out a bottle of wine and a bottle of brandy. And the priest, when he pulls out the bottle of brandy first, the priest says, well, that's not what I really wanted. And the bootlegger says, well, you got to take what you can. So the priest decides to take it. Of course, brandy is his favorite alcohol. It's his poison. And then he pulls out a bottle of wine. And now it's time to open them. And they draw the cork out of the bottle of wine, and they start to drink it. And they drink 1 glass, 2 glasses, 3 glasses. They find reasons to give toasts. Toast this, toast your dog, toast your mother, toast your grandmother. And they bring in the boss, and he'll have some more brandy. And the priest, of course, is going through high anxiety because what he's come to buy is right in front of him, and he's paid for it, and now they're drinking it all up. They begin to talk about the last priest they shot, and one of the men says, "It was the last priest they shot who gave me that communion. They shot him, and I wept." And now they start in on the brandy. And the priest is practically crying. He's drinking too, and he says, "Well, it's the brandy makes me cry." He's crying because what he's come all this way to buy is being consumed right in front of him. Lightning fills the windows. Remember, in literature and in films, when a storm comes, trouble is approaching. They start to talk about the priest that's being hunted. There's still one left, that he can't be doing any good and he can't do any harm. It's kind of odd listening to yourself be talked about right in front of people. You know no good, you know harm either. He hasn't any real chance. But they think that he's here in this town. Ironically, he is. We've taken hostages from the villages. We're shooting people. They've shot 3 or 4 of the hostages, but still they haven't found the priest. And so our priest says, "Well, I'd better be moving on. And where am I supposed to go?" He said, "Well, I've got to go on with friends." So the wine is gone, and he's got about 3 fingers of brandy left. It's an alcohol measurement. I don't know what it means. Puts it in his pocket, goes outside. It's raining hard. The rain is coming down perpendicularly, as it like nails. And he's got nowhere to go. He had hoped that he could kind of hang around in the town, sleep on a park bench, get some shelter somewhere. It's not working. So he goes into a bar, cantina, to get out of the rain. A man is in there, and he's playing pocket billiards. And a man talks to him, and our priest's pocket jiggles against the table, and the man asks him, "What do you got in there?" He says, "Lemonade," and he realizes he's been found out, so he flings himself through a door and runs out into the rain. The streets are dark, and there's no moon. It was, oddly enough, this town was the town he wanted to be promoted to. That was his ambition. So here he is, but he's not any further along. And so he knows he's being hunted. And so he runs to the house of a man we've already met, Padre Jose. This is the priest who decided to get married to stay alive. But Padre Jose does not want anything to do with our priest, tells him, I'll call the police. You know what sort of man I am. I don't belong anymore. I don't want a martyr here. And he spits on him. And so he's rejected by Padre Jose. Padre Jose was so afraid he could not give a 5-second prayer over a dead child in a cemetery. That's how paranoid he is. And so our priest figures this is the beginning of the end. Now I'm going to get caught. He says an act of contrition. He knows he's got to be penitent for his sins. He wants to stay alive. And sure enough, he gets caught by the police. But he's not being caught because he's a priest. He's being caught because he had alcohol in his possession. And the fine for this is 5 pesos. All he's got is 25 cents. And the lieutenant appears. Oddly enough, the very man he's seeking, the lieutenant is seeking, is right in front of him. He doesn't recognize him at all. And our priest is very afraid. He figures, now for sure they're going to kill me. But oddly enough, the lieutenant decides to put him in a cell and give him some kind of work. And that's all he's going to do to him. The priest looks at his adversary and says he looks like a man with something on his mind, as if he were under the influence of some secret passion which had broken up the routine of his life. And the lieutenant does have a passion, but we just don't know what it is. Well, I guess we do know what it is. His passion is to wipe out all religion. He can't do it. And so our priest looks across the desk. He sees the gringo, the white man who's got the gun, who's running around in a landscape somewhere, and he sees a picture of himself. And so they decide to put him in a cell and give him some work to do. He's going to be put in jail. And we're now in chapter 3. It is pitch black in the jail cell. The jail cell is only about 12 feet by 12 feet. There are too many people in there. It's crowded. And you can't see your hand in front of your face. He can't sit down. He's going to be basically on his knees all night long. He's got his legs folded under him. Okay, that's the position of prayer. 2 people are it's so dark, 2 people are in the corner having sex. And they're doing it because nobody can see them. You can hear them, but you can't see them. And an old man is there. And the old man is grieving. He's grieving for his daughter. His daughter was taken away by the priests. They've done it. And the old man is grieving. It's a terrible thing to kill a man. You talk like a priest. And he now begins to talk to a woman. Now, figuring that he's going to die tomorrow morning, he wants to attempt a confession. According to the rules, priest can only confess to another priest. There's no other priest. So he's going to confess to this woman. She's the wrong woman to confess to. She says that the priests were right to take the child away because the child was illegitimate. She's very self-righteous, very pious and very self-righteous. The priest has met women in his profession, women like this, many times. They said he was no fit father, and so they took her away. He had a crucifix, so they took his daughter away. And he tells her, you don't know what's right. The priests know what's right. And he says to her, I am a priest. So this is the first person he's admitted who he is to, flat out. He knows that this jail cell is just like the world. It's overcrowded with lust, crime, unhappy love. Maybe there's some peace there somewhere. And he says, you don't have to inform on me. I'm going to die tomorrow. They'll discover it for themselves. She asks him, are you afraid? He says, of course. But it's come. You believers are all the same. Christianity makes you cowards. But he says to her, look, I'm a bad priest. I'm in a state of mortal sin. And I'm not brave. And then she says to the group, we have a martyr here. Now, she might say it sarcastically because he knows that martyrs are not like him. He doesn't stack up well on the martyr report card. I'm in a state of mortal sin, he repeats. And he feels this affection. It's enormous, it's irrational, but he feels affection for these people in his prison cell. And he knows what they call him. He knows they call him the whiskey priest. His feet are numb now. And he's not going to need him anyways because after tomorrow he won't have to run away anymore. He starts to think about his daughter. Wonders what this pious woman is doing in this jail cell. He's met many pious women, as I've said before. And they have these sentimental notions. The other part of his mortal sin, and he now says it, I have a child. He's confessed his mortal sin. And her reaction is this, that it was wrong, that it's not right, that I'm going to write the bishop about you. Well, that's kind of goofy because right now there's no bishop around to write to, unless he's on another planet or another country. He can let this woman believe he's a martyr, but he's not really a martyr. They are offering a reward for me, he says. But a voice in the dark says, we don't want their blood money. We don't want to turn you in. And he feels this affection for them again. There's no Judas to take the 30 pieces of silver here. He can't make his shoulder twitch without waking the old man. The mosquitoes are droning on. It's a miserable place to be in. He tries to figure out what time they're going to take him. And he knows this is the end. And you have to be prepared for anything, even maybe escape. It's impossible to say what souls might not be lost simply because he was obstinate and proud and wouldn't admit defeat. The pious woman wants to ask him to hear her confession. And they talk about suffering. And she says, he says, you're here, you're suffering. The two people in the corner still having sex. And they talk about suffering and the beauty of suffering. And he says he's a bad priest and he really, really wants a drink more than anything, more than God. And this is when she says, I'll write to the bishop, you're a bad priest. It's odd, she doesn't really react to his having a child out of wedlock. She reacts to him being an alcoholic. And he asks her to pray for him, but she says, the sooner you're dead, the better. Well, no compassion or understanding there. He recalls how in the confessional, you couldn't see the face on the other side of the screen, but you could see the shape of it, and you can visualize the people by listening to them. And she says, you and Padre Jose mock religion. You never had a vocation. You shouldn't have been a priest. So she's running the guilt trip on him. And her religion really is all this woman has ever had. She's kind of like Juan's mother earlier on, reading him the story about Juan the martyr. The little boy listens to the story and goes, I wish I could hear about the shooting. And the mother's upset because he's not as religious as he should be. This is a similar woman. Religion's for everything for her, even though the church has abandoned them. And he's out of touch with her. He goes to sleep. He has a dream. He's outside a door, banging to get in, wants to get in, and his child is laying beside him, and she's bleeding, and she's dying, and he can't do anything about it. And then he wakes up and he's crying. The place was very like the world elsewhere. People snatched at causes of pleasure and pride in cramped and disagreeable surroundings. There was no time to do anything worth doing, and always one dreamed of escape. He tries to strike a bargain with God. If he escapes altogether, he'll be a better priest. He might stop drinking. He'll pray more, whatever it is. But he doesn't know. Look, you can't make bargains with God. So eventually the sun comes up. The jail cell begins to lighten. And all the faces begin to show. And so he figures this is it. He pays his farewell to the world, but he can't get his heart into it. He knows he's not a saint, and that this suit is not really his, and he shouldn't be wearing it. And so he comes out of the cell, and they take his name, and he says, Montez. Well, Pedro Montez is long dead, shot by the lieutenant. The life comes back into his feet. The yard comes sluggishly to life. And all the prisoners file out of the jail cell. And he says to this one woman, pray for me. And she turns to him and says, what's that you said, Montez? The people are covering for him. They know who he is now. They know he's the priest. They heard him. So they take him out of the cell and they give him some work to do. He's going to have to empty all the slop pails where people went to the bathroom in the cells. Takes the pail, sees the people, and he feels this incredible affection for these people, and he prays for them. But he prays to God, give them somebody more worthy to suffer. Give them a real martyr, not me. And yet they do not recognize him at all. They cover for him. We don't want their blood money. He's surprised by this. But guess who's in one of the cells? Or Judas, the mestizo, with his 2 protruding and rotting fangs for teeth. And he says he's not a prisoner, he's a guest. He can't get the reward that's on the priest's head if the soldiers already catch him and put him in jail. There'll be no reward paid. So the mestizo doesn't want to turn him in right now. So the priest dodges getting shot or executed by a technicality. And so he decides to clean up. And he now meets the lieutenant, because when he's done cleaning up, he has to stand before the lieutenant to have his charge dealt with. And they talk. Before he leaves the mestizo, of course, the mestizo says, advise me. And the priest is pretty crafty. He says it'd be a mortal sin to murder me. So because the sergeant's back, the mestizo gave him a cunning and reassuring wink. He watches the pious woman disappear. The sergeant tells him to go to the lieutenant. And he goes to the lieutenant, who's sitting at a desk. And it seems to our priest that venial sins, impatience, the unimportant lie, pride, neglected opportunity cut you off from grace more completely than the worst sins of all. He has a lot of theological thoughts for a priest who's not a very good one. The lieutenant doesn't even look up from his papers and says to him, your name is Montez. I seem to come across too many people with that name. The lieutenant's got a lousy memory. The lieutenant's already met the priest back in that village where the priest went to see his daughter and his former lover, and he said to him, I'm Pedro Montez. Pedro Montez is dead. So the lieutenant doesn't remember who he shot either. Apparently he's not writing names down. It was almost as if the lieutenant had something on his conscience. Well, yeah, executing innocent people would be on somebody's conscience. And he says to the priest, "You're all alike, you people. You never learn the truth that God knows nothing." Well, we all know that God knows everything. At least that's what I learned in catechism. And so the lieutenant pays the 5 pesos that are the fine for the priest. And the priest holds the coin in his fist. It's the price of a mass. If you wanted a mass said, you pay 5 pesos, and tells the lieutenant, "You are a good man." Ironic, because the lieutenant really isn't, and the priest sort of blesses him. The next reading assignment is chapter 4 and into part 3, chapter 1.